Hello, and I'm here to introduce our speakers for the next panel, which is on carpets of Iran, Turkey, and India. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, who is Professor Walter Denny. Professor Denny joined the faculty of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst at the Art History program in 1970. His primary field of teaching and research is the art and architecture of the Islamic world, in particular the artistic traditions of the Ottoman Turks, Islamic carpets and textiles, Islamic imagery in European art, and issues of economics and patronage in Islamic art. He has published widely on a variety of aspects of Ottoman and Islamic art in a variety of different publications. Professor Denny has also taught many types of courses on a wide range of subjects and has fostered a great many students out there in our field. Professor Denny has also served many institutions, for example, as a trustee at the Textile Museum in Washington and an honorary curator of carpets and textiles at Harvard University Art Museums in Cambridge. He's also on many boards and has been serving in many different capacities, both in the United States and in Turkey. But he's especially important to us here at the Metropolitan Museum because he has been one of the senior guides for our gallery project for many years and has guided us on many, many aspects, including, of course, the carpets. So I'm happy to welcome Professor Denny. Thank you.
Thank you, Navina. As I look out here with that light shining directly in my face, I see absolutely nothing of vast, enormous blackness. So I'll trust that there are people out there. What I'm going to do this afternoon is perhaps something different from what the other speakers have done. I want to give a rather broad overview, not only of the problems and the scholarly problems inherent in the Metropolitan's collection, but also to talk to you a little bit about the process that we've gone through over the past 5 years since I've been at the museum in examining these collections with an eye toward planning future rotations and deciding what we're going to actually show. Now, the assumption is here that everybody has seen the new galleries. You know that we added about 35% to our total space compared to the old galleries. And most of you will have noticed that a very large part of that additional space has been taken up by carpets and textiles. Not only that, but as you will begin to notice in future months, these will be rotated, silk generally on a 3-month rotation, wool on a 6-month or 1-year rotation, and it is largely going to be our carpet and textile collection that gives the impression of a brand new museum of Islamic art on a year-to-year basis, we hope stretching out all the way into, well, much longer than I'm going to be around at least, and maybe some of you as well. So that's what I want to talk about today, basically, is what we've been doing, what we've been up to, and what we have encountered in my short tenure here during the past 5 years. Now, first of all, I think I should mention to you something that probably isn't very widely known, and that is that one assumes in the Metropolitan Museum that all the textile holdings of the museum are in the Antonio Ratti Center. And in fact, this is not the case. The Metropolitan also has what you might call a small rump museum out in the park. That is the Lehman collection in its own building. And Mr. Lehman had a very large and important collection of carpets, which is kept in a separate storage under separate management in the Lehman collection. And we have been able to look at some of those carpets over the past 5 years, and it is our hope that some of the Lehman things, which have not been exhibited for a very long time, may eventually find their way into our new galleries on a kind of internal temporary loan. So these are the two poles, the very large number of things in Ratti, approximately 500 carpets and an infinite number of smaller things, and the smaller but very significant group of very large carpets that Mr. Lehman formerly had kept on the floor of his magnificent residence here in New York. Now, like most museums, our carpet collection was built up through gifts of not only the great classical givers to this museum, the bankers and the robber barons of the Gilded Age here in New York, but in more recent times by a rather interesting array of characters. Some of you may recognize, for example, in the center bottom here, Joseph V. McMullen, whose magnificent collection came in the early 70s. McMullen was in turn inspired by Mr. Ballard of St. Louis, who is in the lower right hand here. In the words of Thomas Farnham, a snake oil salesman, who, like his fellow snake oil salesman, Mr. Barnes in Philadelphia, managed to sell a lot of medicine to people that perhaps didn't make them very much better, but at least didn't make them much worse, and made a great deal of money in the process, which he invested in art. Benjamin Altman, of course, we've been extremely lucky in what we have, but what we have, as in most major museums, has been largely due to the generosity of givers and not so much as a conscious plan of building the collections. And of course, in the age we find ourselves now, we're trying to be a little bit more focused on the way in which we collect things and to look at where the holes are. Most recently, we were very, very fortunate to get a wonderful gift just before the new galleries opened from Hilary Dumas of Northern California, who is the only living person here, and as a result is the only one I show in color. And one of her wonderful gifts to us arrived just in time to be indeed the centerpiece of what we used to call Gallery 10. That is the part of the Koch family galleries devoted largely to carpets. So we have strengths and weaknesses. We have things that other museums would give their eye teeth to own. Magnificent small silk carpets from Kashan. A very large number of these things compared to any other museum in the world. You see one on the right-hand side here. On the other hand, we were quite weak in carpets of the so-called painter types, that is, the Bellinis, the Holbeins, the Ghirlandaio's, the other early paintings of the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries that are so well documented, carpets that are so well documented in European paintings and have by accident acquired the names of European painters. It was therefore especially wonderful that we got the Dumas small pattern Holbein. It was even more wonderful that this turned out to be a kissing cousin, if not actually, it was not a piece of the very same carpet as another carpet which will be in a future rotation generously loaned to us by Marshall and Marilyn Wolfe here in Manhattan. It was a wonderful experience to put the two carpets out on the table. The importance of these for us can be emphasized by the fact that until those two carpets came into the museum, one as a loan for the second rotation, one as a gift, all we had in the Holbein vein was a very small fragment, which had been given to us by Elizabeth Eddinghausen in memory of her husband Richard. And now we have one great carpet, and we have a loan carpet to rotate it with. You see, the problem with carpets and the problem with textiles in general is that once is not enough. You have to have a whole bunch of things. So instead of thinking of individual objects, more often in a museum context, we have to think of slots to be filled with rotations over a period of years. And this means that, quite frankly, you can never have enough carpets. Anybody out there who might be thinking that we have too many and that they should be given to some other place, we can never have enough carpets, even though Rati may someday be taxed with finding a place to store them. Now, the complexities of display in the new Alta Khalsa galleries, that's our acronym, you know, Arab lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia. And I actually, if I've done nothing else in 5 years here, I've managed to memorize that. The galleries had some built-in problems. As you can see, track lights were not going to be possible on the ceiling. And it is a high-tech miracle. Indeed, I would say this is probably the major technological challenge that was faced in these new galleries. And the solution we came up with at the Metropolitan is, I hope, a solution that many other institutions will adopt in future. Carpet platforms in which the lighting, a nice, even light, exactly at the right level, can be engineered in a modular platform by placing the lights in the railings, on the underside of the railings, And our magic wands. We have more magic wands than Hogwarts in the Metropolitan Museum, some of them illuminating the ceiling, others of them illuminating the carpets on the wall, and most of them, to most visitors, strikingly invisible. This was indeed an immense challenge when we began to work on these things, and it was, I think, one of the most successful things about the new galleries was the way we used this new technology to great advantage. Rotations, of course, I've already alluded to, and this is the way the room looked when we opened the new galleries, and the next time I maybe give a talk from this podium, I'll show a slide with the same room, and not a single one of the carpets that you see here will be up. They'll be entirely different things. This is, of course, a marvelous opportunity for us. Carpets, because they're so large and because they must be rotated, constitute one way in which we can continually bring a fresh perspective and a fresh aesthetic to rooms that, after all, are not set in stone for the next 40 years or however long this new installation is going to last. The museum is a constantly evolving organism. Things are constantly changing, and carpets are a big part of that constant change. Now, in order to do this, the Metropolitan is very fortunate to have resources that most other institutions do not. You all know that we have one of the best laboratories for textile conservation in the world, if not the best in the world, inside of our own walls, right here in Central Park. And this facility is large enough to deal with extremely large works, like the one in the upper right-hand corner here, a very handsome, actually fragmentary vase carpet, which will be in a future rotation. We also have the Rati Center, a marvelous institution within the museum that enables us to not only see Islamic things in a wonderful surrounding, which is peopled by very intelligent, very generous, and very giving individuals who make textiles more accessible both to the specialists and the general public than in any other museum on earth that I know of. We also have a considerable number of staff here, which means that when we have to unroll an extremely large carpet, that there are always an awful lot of very talented, well-trained, and willing hands to call upon. And we also have, of course, in the Rati Center, the possibility that people can get down and have go down to the basement of the museum and have many seminars at which side by side we can examine in the presence of people whose specialty is dye chemistry, whose specialty is textile conservation, whose specialty is epigraphy, whose specialty is any number of things all together. This is the facility, the actual geographic area of the museum called the Antonio Rati Center is simply something that most museums don't have the space for or the personnel for. We are extremely fortunate to have that facility here, and it has made scholarship much, much easier for all of us, but it's enabled the Met's collections to serve a role in scholarship really out of proportion to their size, a very wonderful thing. Also, of course, the Met has been able to use these resources as a vehicle for teaching. During the very long, very expensive process, which Florica will be talking to you about in a few minutes, that involved the conservation of the so-called emperor's carpet. The carpet on many occasions also served as a mini classroom, and people from various institutions in New York City and outside of New York City could go down to textile conservation and hear the extraordinarily expert staff of that wonderful institution talk about their work and talk about the works of art that they were involved with. This was a major project in all of the work we did for the new galleries, the single most expensive, most arduous, most time-consuming, and most significant project of all, which again I said, as I mentioned, Florica will talk to you about, was the conservation of this one single object. Now, there are some problems in our collection. I don't mean problems in, uh-oh, that isn't very good, or uh-oh, you know, that's mislabeled, but just intellectual problems that that really mesh with some of the great issues in carpet scholarship. And I just want to mention a few of these very briefly. I'm not going to go into great detail about my solutions to these problems, only to say that these are things that are under study and will eventually lead probably to publications and will lead, I hope, to new discoveries and new important conclusions to be drawn in textile history. The first would be what we call the salting carpets. The eponym, the eponymous salting carpet, was a carpet, of course, given by the great British collector Salting to an institution in London, a Persian carpet with a very elaborate, poetic inscribed border in Nastaliq script, first ascribed to the 16th century and the glory days of the Safavid Empire in Persia. And then, by a most curious process, in later times, condemned as late 19th century reproductions of Persian carpets woven in Turkey at a hitherto unfound, undisclosed, and indeed unimagined site. Well, you can see what I thought of that idea from the beginning. The fact is that Kurt Erdmann, who was the great carpet scholar of the 20th century, came up with the idea that the so-called salting carpets were, in fact, reproductions or even fakes. And so, carpets of this sort, which had entered the Metropolitan's collection as great 16th century Persian masterpieces, became late 19th century Persian carpets of Turkish manufacture, languishing in this peculiar limbo until fairly recently, when they have once again been restored to the bosom of the Safavid Empire in its glory days. I am happy to report. Now, this magnificent carpet, and we have two of these. We have one very large one, and we have one fairly small one, which is in the shape of a prayer rug. Carpets of this sort raise all kinds of complicated problems, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but Erdmann's biggest problem was that there was a whole bunch of these carpets, very much like the one that you see here, in the Topkapı Palace Museum in Istanbul, and they were in extremely good condition. And in Erdmann's generation, a carpet that was in good condition could not possibly be old. It's as simple as that. And of course, we now know that's not the case. All kinds of carpets. The discovery in the Pitti Palace in Florence of two carpets that had been stored away back in the 16th century with their original bills of sale wrapped up in them, which was a really nice discovery, that were in the condition in which they had come off the loom in 1579 and in 1614, respectively. Amazing things. So we now no longer even accept the single basic premise of these carpets being late, and that is that they were in absolutely marvelous condition. In fact, sad to say, very, very much the opposite is the case. In the case of the large salting carpet at the Metropolitan, we came to the reluctant conclusion after looking at it, I don't know whether Floric is going to talk about this or not, but this is something we sometimes in museums don't like to talk about, that it is so fragile that it may never, ever again be exhibited because it's simply too perilous even to unroll it and roll it back up again. Nevertheless, these are treasures from the earliest period that we have of Safavid weaving, and they are masterpieces that have been restored to their original provenance and original age. Everything is cyclical, of course, and one of the things that I try to impress upon my students at the University of Massachusetts is that, some of you are old enough here to recall the Nixon years. Nixon who? The Nixon years may recall Ron Ziegler, his press secretary, being caught up short by a reporter who said, well, yesterday, Mr. Ziegler, you said this, and today you say this. And Ron Ziegler said, well, what I'm giving you today is the operative truth for today. Well, that's a little bit of a cynical manipulation of facts, but in fact, what we have to accept is that there are going to be new discoveries made, that everybody who works with works of art ends up stubbing her or his toe every now and then. I've stubbed mine so many times, it's amazing I have any toes left. But this is all part of the rough and tumble of the process. At any rate, the salting carpets are, for now, and because of the scientific nature of the evidence we have now that we didn't have before, I assume for eternity, safely back in their original provenance. A second carpet that is the subject of a considerable amount of interest in the Metropolitan is this carpet. Now, you've all heard of the Walt Disney film, The Love Bug. This is the Love Rug. That is to say, it was given to us by a donor named Love. It's on display in the galleries right now, And it is just about the oddest duck I think any of us has ever encountered. It is believed to be a Safavid carpet of probably the 17th century. It is woven entirely of silk, silk warp, weft, and pile. And many things about the technique are just so close to many of the great early carpets we know of from Iran at this time that there seems to be very little doubt, if we just looked at its technical data, that this carpet is an old and very important carpet, which I believe it to be, by the way. Nevertheless, the design is, to put it mildly, something somewhat eccentric. It seems, as we saw in both Sheila's and Navina's papers this morning, it falls into a group of works of art from the Islamic world that seem to have been very strongly molded by contact with the iconography of the West, probably through print sources. And as a result, this carpet is a very peculiar carpet, a carpet that probably an early generation of scholars would have exhibited, would have dismissed out of hand and would never have dreamed of exhibiting in the Met. I think it says an awful lot, not only for the integrity of this institution, but for the courage of this institution that we put this carpet up in the first rotation. It may not be everybody's idea of the most beautiful thing in the world, but it certainly is a very important side of the art of Iran in the 17th century that we have to acknowledge, and that we are indeed acknowledging in our cutting-edge scholarship, as you heard this morning. But weird. And the more I think about it, the more I'm almost 100% sure that this carpet is a production of the center, what we call Kashan, for various reasons which may someday appear in print. Our third problem, which is our last, never fear, our last, is this one here. Now, I talked about this carpet actually about 3 years ago, wasn't it, Navina? And from this very podium here, we had a small symposium here, and I actually cribbed a little bit from that presentation for this one here. This is a carpet known as the Anhalt carpet. To make a long story short, evidently belonged to the princely family of Anhalt princely family, which is today centered in Dessau in Germany, which of course was on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain for some time. It was purchased by the dealer Devon, which person whom I imagine most of the members of this audience have heard about, and made its way into the collection of the great American art collector, Mr. Kress. The Kress Foundation donated it to the Metropolitan Museum. I recall going into the early days of the Eddinghausen galleries back in the 70s and seeing this magnificent carpet hanging at the end of a long series of galleries. It was one of the great sights of my life. And then something happened. In approximately 1973, the Anhalt carpet received a review of 3 thumbs down from people who arguably at that time were the most important carpet scholars in the world. All people I know very well, love very much. 2 of them are dead now, loved very much, and respect very highly. Charles Grant Ellis, seen in a Buddha-like pose in the lower left-hand corner. May Hamilton Beattie, and Friedrich Spuler, who is still alive and kicking, although he, being my age, has got 1 foot in the hereafter. And these 3 scholars decided that the Anhalt carpet was, dare I say the word in public, a fake. And they communicated their feelings to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, this put the Metropolitan Museum of Art in an extremely touchy position, which I can talk about now quite openly today, because the story, as you no doubt have already imagined, has a happy ending. And Mr. Ellis thought that the Anhalt carpet, let's go backwards for once. Mr. Ellis thought the Anhalt carpet was wrong because it was yellow, and he didn't know of any other yellow carpets. This is what I call the all we have is all there was fallacy, which frequently governs art historical judgments. May Hamilton Beattie thought that this carpet could not possibly be right because it has survived in magnificently good condition, better than any other old Safavid carpet. Compared to the emperor's carpet, this carpet is pristine. It's absolutely pristine. Friedrich Spuler's view of this carpet was somewhat more nuanced. He took a look at it and he saw things he didn't like. He saw straight lines where he believed there should have been curves. He saw things which he felt, quite rightly, were in fact problematic with regard to what, back in the 1970s, we knew about the overall aesthetic of early Safavid art. From the great period, the period of the great miniature paintings from Tabriz, the paintings of our great Shahnameh manuscript, of which we have so many pages. So, basically, the problems, here's one of the problems that Spuler talked about on the right-hand side. These cartouches, they weren't symmetrical, and there were all kinds of little glitches in them. They just didn't look quite right. May Beatty, illustrated in the center, thought that the carpet was in just too good a condition to be old, a fallacy we've already dealt with. And Charles Grant Ellis didn't like the yellow color. All of these things having been communicated to the museum did what any responsible institution would have done at the time. The changes were subtle. The first change was that I came in one day, and instead of reading Anhalt carpet, Safavid Persia, 16th century, I read Anhalt carpet's style of the Safavid Persia in the 16th century. A year later, it was gone. Now it was taken off of display, but the judgments were not. No judgment was final. And by the way, no judgment ever is final. If it was, art historians would quickly become taxi drivers. So this is the problem. And quite frankly, I always believed in this carpet. I have to confess that I had a bias to begin with, and that the first thing I did on August the 22nd, 2007, my first day on the job here at the Met, was I went over and I pulled the Anhalt file. And after having read the file, I'd never seen Spuler's reasons in either German or in English before. Having read his reasons and having read everything in the file, I was convinced without looking at the carpet that it was completely authentic. How can this be? Well, we then began a very lengthy process because the only place large enough, it's too big for textile storage, the only place large enough to look at it was the Velas Blanco courtyard in front of the library. We waited until a Monday. We papered over the Velas Blanco courtyard with polyethylene, which we taped to the floor with the inevitable blue tape, and we rolled the carpet out using a crew of quite a few people, and we had a really good look at it. And found all kinds of interesting things. We found out, for example, that technically speaking, there was absolutely nothing on a close-up examination that would give us any cause for believing that this carpet was anything but authentic. That is, there were no anomalies in that sense. We took the opportunity, I didn't do this myself, of course, I could never do such a thing, but we took the opportunity to pluck a few little knots out of the carpet for samples for dye analysis. We did an exhaustive analysis of the carpet, and the most interesting thing we did was we took a careful look at the condition, and we found out something really quite interesting. In subsequent times, when we could only roll out part of the carpet in Rocky Center, we also undertook microphotography of the carpet and did just many exhaustive tests on it. Now, for all of their usefulness, all these wonderful so-called scientific tests that involve test tubes and isotopes and all of those other things that art historians vaguely understand. We appreciate it. We leave it to our much more intelligent colleagues in conservation to guide us through the labyrinth of science. If we were scientists, we'd be rich, of course. And what we started to do, so we did these tests. So these tests, generally they're helpful, but they're never totally conclusive. One of the things that I wanted to do very much when I looked at it is to look closely at the carpet and then to photograph on different sides of the carpet the very same area of a design and compare them side by side and count the knots from one side of a motif to another to determine whether or not this carpet had been created from a cartoon, that is, from weavers who had the paper cartoon behind the warps, just like a tapestry was done in Europe, and were reproducing the drawing in the carpet, or whether it was done from a knot plan, essentially a set of instructions saying, now tie 2 red knots, now tie a blue knot, tie 2 black knots, now 4 red knots, that sort of thing. And what we found out was that the carpet was most definitely done from a cartoon because the knot counts in comparable motifs were quite different, and indeed subtle differences that you can see in these photographs in the motifs themselves. One other thing that appears in the bottom 2 here pictures especially, you'll notice is that this carpet suffered from an extreme corrosion of the dark brown colors, which in itself is a pretty good indication that a carpet is old. The dark brown dye, because of the materials used in the mordant, the iron mordant that was used to create the favorable circumstances for the dye being soaked up by the wool. Because of the chemicals used originally in the making of these dyes, the dye stuff turned acidic, and eventually the black pile had corroded away completely. In the case of the Anhalt, this was complicated by the fact that some extremely clumsy repairs had been put in, probably by Devon, by the hands of somebody who really wasn't very good at it or was working very, very fast for very little money, which is probably the better explanation. You can see it on the back here. A sort of a non-corrosive brown and a kind of a dark eggplant color was sort of willy-nilly popped into all of these bald areas. And of course, you can see it in a microphotograph. Sticks out like a sore thumb. The wool, the repair wool, was much coarser. And of course, it didn't follow the lines of the original knotting of the carpet. So it was clear that there had been an effort to make the carpet look even more pristine than it was. The lily, the attempt at gilding the lily, in fact, was not successful, as lily gilding almost never is. But it did create a rather peculiar impression. We also then finally got the results, which I'm not going to show you here. This is a sort of privileged document, but I'll show you the heading of it. We got the results from the work of our very, very capable dye analyst chemists here in the museum. And all of this was extremely encouraging. One of the nicer things was we discovered where the yellow comes from. The yellow comes from a highly poisonous plant. You don't want to ever graze horses in a pasture where this grows, but it's very pretty. It's called larkspur. You probably all know what larkspur is. That's the basis for the yellow dye here, and that is the basis for the yellow dye in quite a number of early Persian carpets. So the yellow was okay. And so the questions then of the condition really had been addressed very quickly. The questions of the yellow color took a little bit longer and took the collaboration of our research chemists, but those came out favorably. The last question to be dealt with was the question of all these little design glitches that Spooler had listed in a very lengthy catalog of sins that he believed had been committed by weavers in this rug. Well, and what he said was, this is something that simply wouldn't have been tolerated in Safavid carpets. Well, I beg to differ. As a matter of fact, the detail on the left-hand side here is from the celebrated Ardabil carpet. This is the one in Los Angeles. There are two of them, one in London, which you can only see, remember, every half an hour for 30 seconds. The light goes up, and then for 30 seconds it goes down, and you have to wait another half an hour to see it again. One of the great combinations of theater and art museum that you could see in the Victoria and Albert. And this is hardly up to the standards of a Safavid illuminator on the other side here. This is an incredibly difficult medium to work with. To make a good circle in an oriental carpet is just incredibly difficult for a weaver to do, even with a very finely woven piece. So this doesn't bother me at all. As a matter of fact, almost every single detail, I will go so far as to say every single detail that Spooler criticized, one can find in spades in every other great Safavid carpet in every other great museum in the world. So I sort of tended to dismiss that out of hand. So the color was unusual among surviving examples, but completely authentic according to our current knowledge. The condition was good, but certainly not in any way suspiciously so. Given our current knowledge, we have older carpets than this that have survived in even better condition. The design is well done and completely consonant with our current understanding of design practice of the time. That is, the use of cartoons rather than of knot plans. And Sheila agrees with me that this is probably one of the earliest of these medallion carpets to survive, and we have some very nice parallels with architectural decoration, which can be called upon to support this. Now, we put it out for the first time on public display during a Nehru's celebration here at the museum a couple of years ago. We put it out in Babylon, as you can see here, or sort of, and it was... I think one could feel the carpet was kind of happy to be back in the public eye if works of art indeed do have personalities. Now, I have to tell you that I have one fantasy which I'm going to share with you today, and that is that someday I will combine my two great loves, my love of music and my love of carpets, with the discovery in a German archive, perhaps an Anhalt curtain of this imaginary document here, which, by the way, in my original presentation was in the most exquisite German Fraktur, but which on the Metz computer comes out as just plain old stuff. This is a document that, of course, I will probably never find, but I can dream, can't I? And as you can see here, what I would love to believe, you see there are two Anhalt families, one in Dessau and one in Köthen. The one in Köthen is famous for being Bach's patron. Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Köthen was the patron under whom Bach wrote the Brandenburg Concerti, so I just have this fantasy. Someday I'll find this document, even if I have to forge it myself. So, just to leave you with this thought. The carpets are very pretty. Carpets are, perhaps economically speaking, especially from the 15th century onward, the most important Islamic art form in terms of the investment in plant and the income that it brought to their manufacturers. It is the one Islamic art form that has been distributed more widely in non-Islamic cultures than any other Islamic art form. They were certainly the most expensive works of art, except for architecture, when they were created of anything, including works in precious metals. Carpets are a way of putting your finger on the pulse of how an artist works, because the carpet, once the weft has been passed, everything that is there for eternity or for as long as the carpet lasts. So they're a wonderful window into the way Islamic artists and designers work. For this reason, and also for the reason that I'm not only interested in carpets, but I had a direct hand in it, I find the new Islamic galleries at the Met to be continually thrilling for the 10th, the 50th, the 100th time that you go in. And I promise you that as you come in future years, these beautiful things will be replaced by others equally beautiful and equally inspiring and equally worthy of your attention. Thank you. Would you like me to evade questions for a few minutes? Any questions? Okay, Sheila.
John Thompson has made a good case for the article carpets being made by this, not by cartoons.
But by not plan.
Not plan. So I want to ask, what is the prevalence of one versus the other in your research?
Okay. So the question was that my colleague John Thompson, the British carpet scholar, the first occupant of the May Hamilton Beattie carpet position at Oxford University at the Ashmolean Museum, has come to the conclusion that the article carpets themselves may very well have been done from a knot plan rather than from a cartoon. And this is something, it's not so difficult to do. It just takes an awful lot of very, very patient counting, basically under a magnifying glass. And Sheila asked the question as to, so what do we know about one type of construction versus the other? Well, the short answer is we don't have a large enough sample to know much of anything yet, because quite a few, there are vast numbers of these carpets, and only a tiny handful of them have actually been carefully examined. John Thompson has had a very good look at the one in the Pol di Pezzoli Museum, for example, and a number of others, but neither he nor I have been able to look at a lot of these things and decide this. There's one other thing you have to remember, and that is that even if there's a knot plan, the knot plan itself may be the result of a slip between the drawing that serves as the basis of the knot plan and the knot plan. That is, the same kind of mistake can occur transferring a fluid drawing into a knot plan as translating a fluid drawing into a woven rug itself. There's always going to be some slippage between the original design and what comes out. So however this argument shakes out, I think what we're going to find out is that, especially in the early 16th century, these carpets didn't come from nowhere. 40 years ago, when I started teaching my carpet course at the University of Massachusetts, I didn't know what a 15th century Persian carpet looked like. I'm still not sure that I do. I'm not sure that, when I read in a document that in the year 1502, 500 Turkish carpets passed through the tiny Transylvanian town of Brasov, I had to think, what the hell did a carpet look like from Turkey in 1502? I mean, it was a really interesting question. Now we know, of course, that all the carpets we thought were 16th century or 15th century or earlier. But the fact is that this is a very new field, and it is, as Sheila's question points out, a field that is evolving very, very quickly in important ways. And so the short answer again, which I should have just given rather than the long one I just gave you, is we still need more data. And we will probably be able to get that data. I plan to get a good start on it since I have now 2 years of leave from the University of Massachusetts coming up. And this is one of the major things that I plan to attack. I hope we'll see some publications. But the really quick thing is, quite frankly, look, we were also excited when the new galleries opened in November. But for me, the final chapter is going to be when the Anhalt comes out for the second rotation. That's going to be one of the greatest days of my life. Okay, move on to the next.
I'm now pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Yumiko Kamada. Dr. Kamada was first educated at Keio University in Tokyo, and then later at the School of Oriental and African Studies at London University. In 2002, she did her master's at the University of Tokyo, and in 2011, she received her PhD from New York University's Institute of Fine Arts. There she submitted her dissertation entitled Flowers on Floats, the Production, Circulation, and Reception of Early Modern Indian Carpets. Dr. Kamada was also a fellow in our Islamic department at the Metropolitan Museum, where she says she learned how to first analyze the structure of carpets, partly under the guidance of Professor Denny and other colleagues in the Textile Conservation Department. Dr. Kamada has been working at the Waseda Institute for Advanced Studies, Waseda University, as an assistant professor, and we're happy to welcome her today to give her talk on North Indian or Deccan carpets, entitled North India or Deccan, Reconsideration of the Provenance of Several Carpets at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm indeed honored to have been invited to deliver a paper for this symposium. This presentation is based on my dissertation research during my fellowship here at the Met from 2008 to 2010. I'd like to take a moment to thank Professor Priscilla Soucek, Professor Walter Denny, Dr. Navina Haidal, Dr. Sheila Camby, and the staff members in the Department of Islamic Art, Rati Textile Center, Textile Conservation for their general support. Thank you very much. While most studies about Indian carpets have focused on high-quality North Indian carpets, such as this Pashmina carpet at the museum, my dissertation entitled Flowers on Floats, the Production, Circulation, and Reception of Early Modern Indian Carpets focused on carpets produced in South India, known as the Deccan. In this presentation, first, I will introduce several examples of Deccani carpets, especially those in Japanese collections, and their characteristics. Then, I'd like to suggest a Deccani origin for several carpets in this museum, and in other collections which have been attributed to North India. Lastly, I will briefly describe in what circumstances these carpets were woven in the Deccan and how they were internationally distributed. Extensive research conducted on carpets used as float covers for the Kyoto Gion Festival in 1986 by Nobuko Kajitani, Kojiro Yoshida, Daniel Walker, and Charles Ellis revealed that there were 2-star medallion carpets in the Kyoto Gion Festival Association collection. These carpets were often depicted in late 17th century Dutch John paintings but no examples were known to exist until this discovery. Additionally, they identified several carpets that were different from both Persian and typical North Indian carpets. Therefore, these carpets were named the Kyoto group. In his 1997 publication, Flowers Underfoot, Daniel Walker published images of these 5 carpets in Kyoto and described them as Deccan for the first time. With respect to carpet production in the Deccan, Stephen Cohen is the most knowledgeable scholar in this field. In 1986, he published images of 5 Deccan pile carpets in his short article on Deccan textiles. Then, in 2007, Stephen Cohen and Jessica Hallett attributed 7 carpets currently in Portugal to the Deccan. Most recently, in 2011, he reproduced images of 14 carpets as Deccan in his article entitled Deccan Carpets, Creating a Corpus. As exemplified by several carpets in the Victoria and Albert Museum and related pieces elsewhere, which can be safely attributed to the Deccan, in general, Deccan carpets have the following technical features. The warp has 4 to 7 Z-span undyed cotton yarns plied in the S direction, that is Z47S. Each weft usually consists of 3 shoots of 2 to 5 Z-span beige or brownish cotton yarns. And on average, Deccan carpets have 89 knots per square inch, which is lower than that for Persian and North Indian carpets. As this diagram shows, the carpets in Kyoto have similar technical features to those from the Deccan. Therefore, as Daniel Walker suggests, these carpets in Kyoto should be safely attributed to the Deccan. I would now like to introduce some more Deccan carpets that are in collections around the world. The Hokaboko of the Kyoto Gyan Festival owns a carpet with a pattern of a scrolling serrated leaf. The woven structure, material, and texture point to a Deccan origin. In 2008, I was surprised to find that another Deccan carpet with similar design has been used in the Nagahama Hikiyama Festival in Shiga Prefecture. This carpet has been used as cover for a float which was built in 1785. Interestingly, a residence of an aristocrat in Kent, England, owns a carpet with a serrated scrolling leaf pattern that is closely related to the carpets in Kyoto and Nagahama. These 3 carpets in Kyoto, Nagahama, and Kent share their design and technical features with those of Deccan carpet. These relatively coarsely woven carpets contrast with the much more finely woven carpets from North India. In the following, I'd like to introduce 3 groups of carpets with other types of patterns which were probably woven in the Deccan. This carpet with pattern of scrolling vines and blossoms in Vienna is a famous example of a Deccan carpet dated to the late 17th century to early 18th century, which was purchased in Utrecht in 1896. In 2007, in the catalogue of carpets in a Portuguese collection, Stephen Cohen attributed this carpet with scrolling vines and blossoms to the Deccan. While this type of carpet has been traditionally attributed to North India, in terms of weave structure, design, and texture, I agree with his Deccan attribution. The Met also has a related carpet which was labeled as floral rug beginning of 17th century period of Jahangir in the catalogue of the carpet collection at the Met by M.S. Demand. Given the weave structure, such as a Z5S undyed cotton warp, a Z4 pinkish beige cotton weft, a relatively low knot count of 132 knots per square inch, as well as its color scheme, it seems reasonable to also attribute this carpet to the Deccan. In fact, there are several carpets related to this group. A carpet in San Francisco and a carpet in the Philadelphia Museum of Art are such examples. The design of this type of Deccan carpet with scrolling vines and blossoms was probably inspired by finely woven early 17th century North Indian carpets, such as this one in the Tokugawa Art Museum. Now, I'd like to move on to another group of carpets which can be attributed to the Deccan. This is a finely woven animal hunt carpet from North India. Because of the fine weave of 255 knots per square inch, weavers could accomplish a precise painterly depiction of the hunting scene. Two animal hunt carpets in Coimbra in Portugal, this one and this one, are currently attributed to North India. However, the color scheme and texture and weave structure, such as a Z7S undyed cotton warp, a Z4 pink and beige cotton weft, and a relatively low knot count of 100 to 110 knots per square inch, point to Deccan origin. There are several related pieces. While more finely woven, the Victoria and Albert Museum has a closely related piece. This carpet in the Toyama Memorial Museum in Japan was published as an early 17th century carpet from Lahore. Because of its relatively high knot count of 168 knots per square inch and subtler color scheme, it looks like finely woven North Indian carpet. However, compared to the animal hunt carpet at the National Gallery of Art at Washington, D.C., which has 255 knots per square inch, this carpet in the Toyama collection is much more coarser and does not achieve such painterly quality. Considering the fact that all four carpets in Coimbra, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and in the Toyama collection are almost identical in size and have a similar structure, it seems more reasonable to attribute this carpet to the Deccan. While this carpet in the Toyama collection is one of the best of its type in terms of quality, this highly worn and damaged carpet at the Met is an example of a much coarser type of the same group. We can attribute this carpet to the late 17th to early 18th century. The third group has an overall geometric pattern. This carpet with geometric design at the Met exhibits the typical technical characteristics of Deccan carpet. It has a 6-ply warp of Z-spun undyed cotton yarns and 3 parallel weft of Z-spun pink yarns. It has 132 knots per square inch. While this carpet was published by M.S. Demand as a geometric floral rug early 17th century period of Jahangir, it seems more reasonable to attribute this to late 17th to early 18th century Deccan. The Textile Museum also has a carpet with overall geometric pattern with similar weave structure. This overall geometric design may have been derived from South Indian textiles, such as this one from Madras. There are several carpets with similar designs which were probably woven in the Deccan. Now, I'd like to move on to the Indian carpet trade of the 17th century to 18th century to briefly explain the circumstances in which these carpets from the Deccan were traded. The English East India Company was established in 1600, and in the early 17th century, they exported carpets from Persia and North India via the port of Surat in the early 17th century. At the beginning of the 17th century, North Indian carpet production center, such as Lahore, produced finely woven carpets such as this. So the English must have been very impressed by Indian carpets from North India. This is another finely woven carpet from North India. It was made in Lahore between 1630 and 1632 in accordance with an order from the director of the Gardener's Company in London. The Dutch East India Company also engaged in carpet trade. This carpet was brought to Japan by the Dutch as a diplomatic gift. These finely woven carpets from North India, as well as Persian carpets, such as this, were used by the Dutch as diplomatic gifts for Japan. In fact, in 1634, the Dutch presented this type of Persian carpet to the shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu. However, as trade documents indicate, it was time-consuming and expensive to obtain these finely woven carpets from Persia and North India. In contrast to these finely woven carpets from Persia and North India, which were not suitable as commodities, those from the Deccan, such as these at the Met, which I have just attributed to the Deccan in this paper, seem to have circulated as trade goods for a much larger market from the late 17th century. At the beginning of the 17th century, both the English and Dutch East India Companies set up factories on the Coromandel coast. Here, for instance, at Machilipatnam, because this area had a long tradition of producing fine printed cotton textile. Machilipatnam, Erode, and Warangal were also famous for carpet production. The English East India Company records of 1679 mention that there was a carpet industry in Erode in the Deccan, which had been established by Persian immigrants in the mid-16th century. This record is substantiated by the design of this Deccani carpet in Kyoto, which is based on a typical 17th century Persian carpet design of scrolling serrated leaf. The Dutch and the English seem to have realized the potential of Deccani carpet as trade goods from the mid-17th century. In 1959, Brigitte Schoenemann made a diagram of the layout of the star medallion carpet based on depictions in late 17th century Dutch down paintings. When she wrote her article, no carpets with this design were known to exist, so she called them an unknown type of carpet. However, as I mentioned, after the discovery of Indian carpets in Kyoto in 1986, it became clear that carpets of this unknown type matched the star medallion carpets owned by Kankoboko and Kita-Kannonyama in Kyoto. Tokugawa Art Museum also has a carpet of the same type. So far, these are the only 3 carpets of this type which are known to exist. In terms of technique, material, texture, and motifs, these 3 carpets can be safely attributed to the Deccan. According to Ono Idima, this type of star medallion carpet and related pieces began to be depicted from around 1650 and were most frequently represented in the 1660s and 1670s. Also, in 1683, the English East India Company ordered 1,500 carpets in Coromandel in the Deccan. Given the fact that the East India Companies and private traders were still actively trading textiles made on the Coromandel coast into the 18th century, and that Deccan carpets in Kyoto were used mainly from the 18th century, Deccan carpets probably continued to have been exported in the 18th century. Coincidentally, many Dutch John paintings, such as this one by Vermeer, depict small-sized carpets being used as table covers. This indicates the frequent use of imported carpets in daily settings. Given the above-mentioned carpet trade at that time, these depictions were probably of closely woven small-sized carpets produced in the Deccan for export, such as this one in Kyoto. Probably these closely woven carpets from the Deccan were consumed as a commodity for daily use and therefore easily worn out. This could be one reason why no Deccan carpets are known to exist in the Netherlands. So, to conclude, in this paper, I have reattributed 3 groups of Indian carpets to the Deccan, which were previously attributed to North India. As we have seen, after the mid-17th century, Deccan carpets seem to have been more important than carpets from Persia and North India as trade goods. Deccan carpets were extensively distributed through international trade networks by the Dutch and the English, and used in different settings by Indians, Portuguese, English, Dutch, and Japanese. Along with Indian textiles such as chintz, these Deccan carpets were probably woven near the Coromandel coast and internationally circulated by East India Companies and other traders as trade goods. For the emerging middle classes, these relatively costly woven Deccan carpets were probably a less expensive substitute for the much more expensive finely woven carpets from Persia and North India. Thank you very much.
Could you just say a bit more about the carpets hanging on the floats? What they were used for?
You mean why they put those carpets on the floats? In the 16th century, they used imported Chinese and Korean textile as float covers, but because this festival is for the Shinto festival of the Kyoto, of the Yasaka Shrine in Kyoto, and they paraded to prevent plague in Kyoto. So people consider that each float can gather the bad spirit and can make the city more clean. So, and the Kyoto Gion Festival was funded by one of the most powerful merchants in Kyoto, and they are very wealthy, so they would like to show their power through those expensive imported textiles. So once imported Chinese and Korean textile became more available to other people, they tried to get much more rare carpet from India and Persia as a cover. So that's why they use those imported Indian and Persian carpets as float covers.
Thank you so much for that very, that sort of great advance in our understanding of these categories of carpets and their productions. I was just wondering about the location of the production of Deccani carpets, because they are seemingly associated more with Dutch trade, and the whole location of that world is on the eastern coast. Do you have any evidence of them going westward? I didn't quite follow that part of it. And also, would you consider sort of coming to new centers of production, imagining centers of production which somehow combine the vocabulary of Mughal carpets, which is so much in evidence in the Deccan, and the features that we are calling Deccani? In other words, is there a meeting ground for these two traditions that would explain why you do have a strong Mughal language even if the carpet is Deccan? So in other words, the northern Deccan, places like Burhanpur, where textiles were being produced, that sort of brought these traditions together in terms of the motifs and the styles.
First, when I went to Portugal, there are several carpets which were probably woven in the Deccan, and they say they were used in church for many years before they were finally went to the museums. And I found several carpets which I thought from the Deccan in several aristocrats' house in England. So I think those carpets from the Deccan were brought to England or Portugal or somewhere else by those East India Company employees or private traders, because in the 18th centuries they were allowed to brought those carpets as a private trade goods. So it's pretty easy to get those carpets from the Coromandel coast. It's pretty accessible, and those things are not that so expensive. So I think those carpets were probably privately and sometimes officially brought to Europe. And another question is that the carpets which I today show is mainly for trade, and Deccan has other type of carpets for their own use, like they have silk Deccani carpet. However, for those carpets for export, I think in order to make those carpets more attractive, I think they try to imitate Mughal prototype, so to make them a good substitute for more expensive North Indian carpet. I think that's one reason why they look similar. So that's my guess.
From 1975 to 1988, he was curator of ancient, Near Eastern, and Far Eastern art at the Cincinnati Art Museum. He has degrees from Bowdoin College and Harvard University, and his military service included Persian language training and a 2-year assignment as an army officer in Iran. Over the 37 years of his museum career, Mr. Walker has published and lectured widely on diverse topics related to textiles and carpets, Islamic art, and museology. He also organized 22 exhibitions, and Flowers Underfoot, Indian Carpets of the Mughal Era, which was here at the Met, won the award for the best exhibition of 1998. His talk today is called The Carpets of Amir Fort. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity of having control of the podium for a few minutes to congratulate the staff of the Islamic department on the magnificent job they've done with the galleries, which I think, owing to very careful planning and the increase in the amount of space available has resulted in a very clear view, really for the first time, of the breadth and depth of the magnificent collection here. So hats off to the staff. I'm going to talk today about the carpets of Amir Fort, and I have a very clear and simple purpose in doing this. There are many, many carpets we associate with Jaipur, a lot of 17th century carpets, but in fact, their real connection is with Amir. Jaipur was founded only in 1727. The carpets are earlier than that. They were made for and used in the fort at Amir, some 5 miles away from Jaipur. References have been made over the years about where those carpets might have been used, why they were they ordered for specific spaces, where were they used within the context of Amir Fort. And the main purpose of my talk today, following a fairly brief overview of the major carpet types found in the Jaipur collection, the main point of the talk will be to take a look at the fort itself, try to figure out which parts of it are old enough to have been the right places for carpets of this vintage to appear, and to compare the spaces, the possible spaces, to the supply of carpets we can definitively associate with Amir, and see where we come out of this. This is a very preliminary investigation. There's a lot of work. Everyone says the same thing. This is such a cliche. This is the beginning of the research. It's always that way, because when it comes down to crunch time on your paper, you don't get as far into it as you hope you would. But anyway, this is preliminary work. There will be more, but I still think there are things to glean from this, important things. When I say the Jaipur collection, I'm talking about the collection of the Maharaja of Jaipur. It consists today of somewhere over 100 pieces. It's difficult to be sure about this because, in fact, the bulk of these carpets are now locked up, inaccessible, in storerooms that have been closed since the 80s as a result of internal family disputes about inheritance. Hopefully that situation will be cleared up one of these days and we'll know exactly how many carpets survive. They're periodically checked, but not counted. In 1920, I should also say my talk today differs a little bit from most of the others in that I'm not concentrating on a particular rug in the Met. I'm looking at a subject. But in fact, the point of departure for that subject, and one of the key pieces, or an excellent representative example of the type of thing I'm talking about, can be found in the rug on the left, which is shown here in detail form. This is a rug in the Met, very famous Indian flower rug. The mate to it is on the right, shown in complete form, and I'll talk more about both of these rugs in a few minutes. But this type of carpet is one of the key types represented in Jaipur. In 1929, a man named Campbell was invited to Jaipur to visit from the Victoria and Albert Museum in order to do a survey of the carpet collection in Jaipur and to prepare a report on those rugs and to make recommendations about conservation treatment that he recommended. That report is on file and is accessible to people. Campbell saw and recorded and photographed 212 pieces. So as of 1929, that's the count of carpets known to have been in the Jaipur Royal Collection. One of the interesting things that comes out of the Campbell report is an awareness of the fact that some of these carpets have labels on the back, and sometimes multiple labels. And those labels usually include information about either original acquisition or dates of inventory through the years. There are also registers, which in most cases repeat the information seen on the labels. Occasionally, there's something a bit different, so it's important to check the registers too for corroboration of information. So during the course of this century, the holdings of the Jaipur collection have diminished somewhat for a number of reasons. We can see that from the photographs, a review of the photographs in the Campbell report, compared, for example, to an inventory that was done by May Beattie in 1972. She was using the Campbell report for reference, and there were a fair number of pieces, not tons, but a fair number of pieces that had gone missing in those intervening years. There was also a publication in 1905 by Colonel T.H. Hendley, Asian carpet 16th and 16th and 17th century designs from the Jaipur palaces, which included images, 100 plates of rugs in that collection and 50 plates of Indian rugs from other collections. So that cluster of 100 plates gives us a very good indication of the rugs that were there as of 1905, and some of those rugs had gone missing by the time Campbell came in 1929. So that shows us what some of the losses consisted of. Other things were responsible for the shift. For example, in 1961, the royal family made a gift of 15 carpets from their private collection to the museum they were founding in the City Palace Museum, called the City Palace Museum. Those 15 carpets belong to that museum today and have been, until fairly recent times, on view in the large hall. In the late 1950s, some of the secondary material in the Jaipur stores was dispersed to the Calico Museum in Ahmedabad and a lesser number of pieces to the Bharat Kala Bhavan in Varanasi. It has been said that some of the calico material actually came out of a secondary storeroom in Jaipur, but I don't think that can be so, because in fact several of the pieces that ended up in Ahmedabad still have the inventory numbers and were recorded, they still have the labels, and were recorded by Campbell in 1929. So they're from the same stores as the other things seen by Campbell, but it is fair to say that the pieces that were sold off are lesser in terms of condition. They're very fragmentary and they have condition problems. Another situation that came up during the course of last century was the fact that carpets lent to the great exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. The show was called Art of India and Pakistan. 7 carpets were lent from the Jaipur collection for that show in 1947, and by the time they came back, India was independent. And this changed things completely, and in fact, when they came back, they didn't go back to the Maharaja, they went to Albert Hall, which is a museum in Rajasthan, which by then was under the control of the state government, which was controlled by the same Congress party that was controlling the national scene. And it's an unusual situation, but it's true that many of the pieces that came back from India from London at that time, rather than being returned to their home institutions or their home owners, were actually gathered in Delhi and a couple of other major cities to form national museums. That was the standard thing. The case in Jaipur was a bit different because, in fact, they came back to a state museum. But anyway, those carpets have remained at Albert Hall ever since. There was also a garden carpet, which I'll show you in a few minutes, discovered in Amherst relatively late, that is 1937, which was then transferred to Albert Hall in 37, which at that time belonged to the Maharaja. It's a museum he had set up, or his ancestor had set up. The other point is, over the course of the century, a significant number of pieces actually moved west, moved into Western collections. And one sees a prime example of that right here in the Met rug on the left, which came into the Met's collection in 1970, but had left India sometime before that. It is a carpet that was seen by Campbell, was recorded by him. It had at that time, although it's not there anymore, it had a label which said that it had been acquired in 1656 in Lahore. Now that doesn't mean it was made in Lahore, but it does mean it was made somewhere in the north and then traded through Lahore. It's interesting to note that it's one of a pair. And the rug on the right is a piece that belongs to Albert Hall. It was formerly in the Jaipur collection, the Maharaja's collection, went off to London to that exhibition, and then came back and went to Albert Hall. That rug does not have a label, but of course we know it came out of the Jaipur collection, as did the rug on the left. This type of design with rows of flowering plants is found in many different variations within the Jaipur holdings. This particular type is seen in 21 examples in total. There are 9 others with a lattice pattern in which the flowers are arranged, and 9 others that are smaller runners or mats. On these large rectangular rugs with flower patterns, the border, this is not a conventional border, this is an unusual one. The usual border, which we'll see in another rug in a while, consists again of the same kinds of rows of plants that we see in the field. So this is an unusual one. These carpets also come in shaped versions of different types, and the shapes are puzzling. One type is like this. The arch is relatively curvilinear. It's asymmetrical. It ends in a long point, which extends further out than the line here. This is further down. But it exhibits the same taste and the same basic pattern and decorative conventions as the rectangular rug I just showed. This one is in Cincinnati. This is a rug that was published by Henley in 1905 in 21 plates. It was a star piece in that volume. And by 1929, when Campbell came to Jaipur, the rug was not seen anymore, so it left before 29. The border of this rug is characteristic of these shaped pieces. It's a narrower border than you see on the rectangular rugs, and it just shows small rosettes flanked by pairs of leaves. That's conventional for this type. There's another shape type with a form of arch, but in that type, the arch is straight-sided. So you'll have a straight line here, a straight line across, and then a straight line down, which means that if you take one rug oriented this way and a mate to it, if you leave a gap for an aisle, which would leave a space in the back too, because they end here, you'd end up with space inside for an octagonal rug. Oop, too much. Other shapes are represented in, the arch type. There are 16 examples of arch flower rugs noted by Campbell, so it's another major group. There are a limited number of examples of other shapes. This one, if you look carefully, you can see that there are corners being turned here in the weave. This rug is erect now. You can see the angled sides as it turns the corner. This was originally an octagonal rug. This belongs to the Calico Museum in Ahmedabad, not in good shape. It was recorded by Campbell in 1929. The photograph of this rug shows it whole at that moment. This is a rug whose label, now lost, says that it had been purchased in 1657. This is quite a high-grade rug with all silk wefts. It's a flower pattern. You can see that in the detail on the right. A little unusual in that the flowers are all oriented to be seen from outside the rug. The convention is sometimes that it be seen from the center point of the rug. Let me go back and just say that here we see the flowers are arranged to be seen from the center point of the arch, from the opening. There's also a round rug, 2 examples, but one is not in a flower pattern, also surviving, and I'll show that in a little bit. A second type, major class, is the Durbar carpets. Big, thick, heavy things, immense in size. This is a pair.
Slide on the left was shot in 73 in the open courtyard. The slide on the right was shot from Campbell's photograph of 1929 of the pair. These are 63 feet 3 inches long, where you can see from the scale of the men in the photo on the right. That's the center line of the rug at the top. There's a label on one of them. It was purchased from Kapur Chand Khatri of Lahore in 1656. These Durbar carpets have their own type. They're also from Lahore, or purchased in Lahore, I should say, but they're very different in feel, and they have a somewhat different palette from the flower-style rugs. There is one published reference to carpets actually produced at Amir Fort as of 1640, and one wonders what sort of carpets those might have been. And I would have said, if labels did not survive on any of these Durbar carpets, indicating a purchase in Lahore, I would have thought these would make excellent candidates, because they're different enough and they represent a production that probably didn't have as long a history and as much experience as others, but the labels say otherwise, so I think we can't consider that. So we simply don't know what was made at Amir. On the left, we have a Pashmina carpet. These are very high-grade things with silk foundations. Pile is Pashmina fiber from mountain goats. This is the one Pashmina carpet that can be associated with the Jaipur collection, the only one I'm aware of. This is now in the possession of the City Palace Museum, but of course it came out of the Maharaja's collection in '61. Pashmina does not seem to have been a big thing in this particular situation. On the right is an example of an Indian carpet, a North Indian carpet dating from around 1600. It's a carpet with many fragments extant still in the Jaipur collection. Also a few fragments in calico that came there in the late 50s from Jaipur. It's very much in a Persian style. It's almost imitative, or at least reflects very strong Persian influence. Of all of these fragments, only one has a label on the back, and that is one of the fragments in calico, and it has not been read yet. But it will be interesting to see what that says about the acquisition date for a rug made this early. That might be interesting. Finally, the last thing I want to mention about the major types of carpets is that there were actual Persian carpets collected in Jaipur. These are two examples. The one on the left is an important kind of freestanding example of a great garden carpet. This is the rug that was discovered very late at Amir. In 1937, it was transferred to Albert Hall. It's been there ever since. It's a Persian rug of a type traditionally associated with the city of Kerman. It was woven, in all likelihood, between 1623 and 1632. 1632 is the earliest date given on one of the inventory labels on the back of the rug, and 1623 was the date that Raja Jai Singh came to power, and it was under his watch that most of the carpets were ordered for Amir. So this was probably ordered by him. The label on the back says veloyati, which is a term that means foreign carpet. That usually refers to Persian. It says the design is chahar-bagh, that's the four-garden type. The garden is broken by canals into quadrants, which are then subdivided further. This is a detail from this rug, by the way. It doesn't even show the main central crossing or pavilion. And it also gives a date of August 29th, 1932. The rug on the right is an Indo-Persian type. These were immense pieces. This one was 42 feet long. It's one of a pair. There are 29 examples of Indo-Persian carpets in the Jaipur collection, or rather noted by Campbell, and this rug also was noted on the label as a foreign carpet. So they're doing pretty well distinguishing. Many of the rugs, of course, do not have labels. Okay. The Jaipur rugs were part of the royal holdings of the Kachwaha clan that ruled Jaipur until recent times, when titles and privy purses were withdrawn. Prior to the founding of Jaipur in 1727, the seat of the Kachwaha power was Amir, 5 miles to the north of Jaipur. A massive fort containing a palace was built along a ridge situated between a higher ridge, which sits behind the palace, and you can't see it here, and the lake known as Tal Katora here in the foreground. The line of buildings runs north to south, and we're looking here to the northwest. The Kachwahas claim descent from the son of Rama, hero of the Ramayana. They settled at Amir about 1070 AD and made it their capital, seizing it from a local tribe, the Minas. Our interest in the Kachwahas begins with the ruler Barmal, who ruled from 1548 to 1574. It was his successful offer of his daughter in marriage to the Mughal Emperor Akbar that secured for Barmal and his successors a powerful role in the empire, even at the cost of waging war on the imperial side against their fellow Rajputs. Maharaja Man Singh I, who ruled from 1589 to 1614, continued this tradition of service to the Mughals, as did Jai Singh I, who ruled from 1621 to 1667, a very long reign. He was also known as Mirza Raja, and he was almost always on campaign with the Mughals. That was just a fact of life. Sawai Jai Singh II, who ruled from 1699 to 1743, is mainly remembered as the founder of the city of Jaipur in 1727. With the decline in Mughal authority and power, the fortified seclusion of Amir Fort no longer seemed necessary, and Sawai Jai Singh's intention was to establish a flourishing commercial center that enhanced his kingdom's status. Inventory labels and registers tell us that carpets were purchased or inventoried between 1632 and the very beginning of the 18th century, with the largest quantity acquired in the 1650s and 1660s. All were acquired for the palace at Amir Fort by Jai Singh. Let us now look at Amir Fort and focus on those portions of the complex that existed already by the time the carpets were arriving in quantity. This is a fairly simplified plan of the palace complex at Amir, drawn by historian Giles Tillotson and published in his very good book on the palaces of Rajasthan in the late 80s. There are 4 separate courts arranged in a line. I've turned this on its side so it fits the screen better, and it also happens to line up very nicely with the photograph of Amir Fort that I just showed. We'll go back to that in a minute. The oldest surviving building is the southernmost court here on the left side. This was erected by Man Singh between 1592 and 1615. And it originally stood alone as a palace. It was the original palace of the Kachwahas at Amir. Jai Singh I, 1621 to 1667, made very significant changes by adding the 2 courtyards to the north. At the top was the public court, here, containing the Devon Am, or Hall of Public Audience. In between the old court and that new court was the private palace of the Maharaja, right here. This freed up the original court for eventual conversion to a zenana, or women's quarters. The 4th, or northernmost courtyard, to accommodate the palace guard, was added by Sawai Jai Singh II shortly before the creation of Jaipur. The specific areas that hold interest in terms of carpet usage in the middle of the 17th century are really just 2. First is the Devon Am, thought by historian Giles Tillotson, to whom I'm greatly indebted for insight into all sorts of things, thought by him to have been built between 1623, when Jai Singh I came to power, and 1627, when Jahangir died. That's the first. And the second is the so-called Shish Mahal, or Mirror Palace, known in a more conventional way as the Jai Mandir and the Jas Mandir, and that's the private palace situated right here within that courtyard. And that was built a bit later than the Devon Am, perhaps in the 1640s, more or less contemporaneous with the Red Fort in Agra, whose style was closely imitated. The oldest court was radically altered by the conversion to a zenana, leaving little evidence of the earlier spaces where carpets might have been used. The pavilion in the center of the court, right there, is probably a feature of the conversion and not original. Let me go back just once. These are the same courts. This is the oldest right here. These are the two added by Jai Singh. You can see the Shish Mahal, the mirror palace, projecting at the top, giving some character to the exterior view of this wall. And here we have, this is the other added court added by Jai Singh, and at the top of this, can't see it too well here, right behind there, that's a platform added just behind the Devon Am, and then this is the fourth courtyard added for the guard. Taking the Shish Mahal first, since it was suggested by Campbell as the place the carpets would have been used, notice that the building consists of two levels. On the first level, we have a large interior chamber, pictured on the right, which is encircled on three sides by a veranda. Wall and ceiling surfaces are covered by glass mosaic patterns, little vase-shaped alcoves, and marble dado panels embellished with carved flowers, very much in the Mughal style. It is virtually impossible to match up rectangular carpets with rectangular rooms. The sizes just never quite work out, but it can surely be said that flower-style carpets would be suitable here, given the nature of the dado decoration, the flower style. One doesn't know if one carpet, two, or many would have covered the floor. Upstairs is a pavilion featuring a bangla roof in the center and two domes flanking, and those features cover a large central hall flanking two smaller halls, all with angled walls at the ends, which to my mind discourage the placement of carpets in those spaces, since I don't know any carpets of those shapes. No existing rugs fit these. To the left and right are little octagonal pavilions, one there and one here. This is one of them. This is the one to the south. The one octagonal rug that exists is much too small to fit within this pavilion, but a circular rug now at Albert Hall fits perfectly. This is one of the rugs seen by Campbell in 1929. Dimensionally perfect, but I am reluctant to think that that's what they would have done when they had all the means in the world at their disposal to make an octagonal rug that would have fit the room perfectly. So I doubt that it was used there. Next, let's consider the Devon Am, a large hypostyle hall with a striking beamed ceiling in alternating colors. Certainly, carpets are likely to have been laid out in the main chamber, seen here on the main floor to the right, although it is impossible to know which. In the general view of the building to the left, note the 19th century addition to the back. The darker color, the red sandstone, is the original building, and the area to the back was added in the 19th century. Upstairs, we find two octagonal platforms encircled by balustrades. That's one of them right there, and these would be lovely spots for octagonal rugs, but these platforms didn't exist in the 17th century, so they can be ruled out. However, a large platform in the center of this roof area above the Devon Am, perhaps used for evening entertainment, seems part of the original structure. It happens to just accommodate a pair of enormous Durbar carpets placed side by side, together measuring 42 feet 5 inches by 25 feet 8 inches. But it's also true that these same two carpets could also fit the main hypostyle hall downstairs. So that is a viable possibility. Looking to the east and down at the lake that nestles at the foot of the fortification, one sees a series of 3 gardens that present possibilities for carpet placement not, to my knowledge, previously suggested. Carpets would certainly have been used indoors in the palace, certainly in the royals' principal rooms, but could surely also be placed temporarily outside for festive occasions. The arrangement of the garden presents a functional parallel to the courtyards of the palace above. The northernmost, which is here with its central pavilion, represents the public sphere. The middle, which is situated in this zone right here, which is basically built on the dam for the lake, represents the private. In this area are 2 small pavilions with bangla roofs flanking a central square fountain. Here is one of the pavilions with a bangla roof. There's another one just opposite it right there. And in between is a large square tank or fountain that you can't see very well in the picture, which might conceivably at one point have been a platform rather than a fountain. The northern pavilion also serves as a connection between the private sphere and the public, since it looks out over this open courtyard and serves as a jaroka. At the southern corners are little octagonal pavilions, one here, but our one octagonal rug is too small. I should point out that a lot of these octagonal pavilions are the same size. The third garden, to the south, in the lower slide, is a 3-level affair that seems to float on the lake. It has been suggested that this is the Zenana area, thus completing the parallel with the courtyards above. But this is uncertain. Note that there are 2 octagonal viewing platforms here. They're the same size as the pavilions here. And also note the 3 main platforms along the central axis that runs north-south on the 3 levels, one here, and one here. Here is the northern pavilion of the central garden, and this could easily date from the reign of Jai Singh, when the carpets were coming in. Inside, on the right, note the finely drawn flowers in the interior panels under the vaulted ceiling. No existing carpet fits this space exactly or even closely, but a rectangular flower rug with flowers oriented to the long side at the top here would be a perfect match on the basis of pattern and style. We have a range of sizes for carpets of this design, ranging from smaller than the pavilion dimensions to larger, so it certainly fits within the range of carpets available or made at that time. One is also hard-pressed to conceive of a more suitable pattern type to float in the midst of the 3-level garden to the south, which is visible in the lower image here, which may also have been part of Jai Singh's extensive building program. All right, I want to conclude with just a quick note about a couple of leftovers that raise questions and pose some problems and remain unresolved. First is the issue of the shaped carpets. Unfortunately, the most tantalizing question of all, and the one thing that more than anything else I'd like to try to resolve with this, but so far no luck. Lots of things have been suggested for these. This image on the left, by the way, is the Cincinnati arched rug doubled over. A lot of these rugs were made in pairs or near pairs, and they may well have been used this way, but it does result in a rather odd-shaped opening in the center. One suggestion is that these rugs might have been used in an architectural sense as to form archways in openings between rooms. But if you look at the range of types and shapes, there's so much variation, it's difficult to conceive of a suite of such rugs being used in one building because they just don't match. And this is complicated by the existence of a very odd rug in calico, in Ahmedabad, which came from Jaipur, which is shaped, but in a much more erratic and unusual way than the flower rugs we've been looking at. In weave, it conforms to the Durbar type, but it represents another variation, an unusual variation on the shape theme, and makes no sense to me at all in an architectural context. I've suggested that they may have flanked a raised dais of some sort, probably with a larger gap between the two, because of the orientation of the flowers to the center. Other people have suggested a fountain in the center. That doesn't work with the flower orientation. The other problem is that if you put these rugs together as pairs, you end up with a near square 14, 15, 16-foot square. There's no evidence of any single space at all in Amir Fort that accommodates an arrangement like that, unless they sit in the middle or at one side of a much larger space, and we just can't tell today. Next, we have this very unusual rug in Jaipur. This has not been assembled from pieces, although there's one, you can see one patch right there. The rest of it is whole. It was made this way. And the oddest feature is the use of these interior borders, which kind of suggest or imply rooms or even interior walls. And it raises the question, in, I think, a very eloquent way, about the use of any of these carpets in tents and rather than permanent structures. And I think that's an issue that needs a lot more attention. And there is, as many of you know, at least one surviving example of a great tent associated with Jaipur. This is the large panel that's in the Met's collection. Controversial dating, but of great interest. But there's more to be learned about tents, and we hope that with the opening of locked storerooms in Jaipur, there may be more to look at, which will help us. Finally, I think one of the most important points I can make about the rugs that came from Amir and were used at Amir, as we try to figure out how they might have been used there, is to consider the fact that the number of carpets that we can associate with Jaipur, and therefore with Amir, dramatically exceeds the floor space that we see at Amir from that period. Dramatically. If that's the case, we need to look for another explanation for where all these carpets were used. Thank you very much.
Even when it's off. So, anyway, thank you very much. It's been a great afternoon, and I'm now delighted to introduce our last speaker, who is Dr. Florica Zaharia, who has been since 2003 the conservator in charge of the Department of Textile Conservation here at the Met. Dr. Zaharia has a PhD in visual arts from the National University of Art in Bucharest. Her subject was aesthetical and technological considerations related to the traditional textiles made of wool, hemp, and linen in some ethnographical areas of Transylvania. She has also a major publication on that same subject based on more than 15 years of research on traditional textile materials and their technology from the villages of Transylvania and surrounding areas in Romania. Dr. Zaharia has been coordinating and leading all the work that's been done around our new galleries, and has educated us all on the qualities of the collection. And today she will be speaking about a group of carpets from the Metropolitan's collection. Her talk is entitled Safavid Carpets from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's my pleasure to welcome her. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Navina, for the introduction. The Met world-renowned collection of Safavid carpet, it's one of the highlights of the newly opened gallery of the Alti Khalsa. We know the name, I'm not going to repeat it. Those carpets are characterized by a complex design which reflect the cultural intersection of the Safavid culture with extraordinary technical realization of weaving materials and colors. My presentation will focus on the methodology of conserving and displaying this group of carpet at the Metropolitan Museum during the entire collection history, starting more than a century ago and culminating with the work in preparation for the opening of the Alti Khalsa Gallery in November 2011. Here are some highlights of the museum Safavid carpets, and I'm sure we can recognize many of them among, including the emperor on the left and the love carpet. Their design is sumptuous, never before equalized by any other group of carpets. Arabesque motifs were used as background and support for floral and animal elements of design. This undulating line vibrates the carpet surface and contrasts with the background color, as we see in this Anhalt medallion carpet. In some carpets, scripts appear to present a poetic message. The emperor's carpet here is the best example. Its narrow border is completely covered with verses meant to address the reader who would be sitting in the center of the carpet. The lines of script are delicately woven with brown wool pile. The Safavid carpets were woven in vivid reds, yellow, blues, and greens. The dyes are intense and their tonalities are well retained. It is surprising to see green and yellow colors so well preserved on the front of the carpet, as we know that those carpets, those dyes easily are damaged by light. This is remarkable, especially in comparison with the Western European tapestry of the same period, where those two colors are preserved only on the tapestry's reverse side. Where contrasting colors, red, yellow, white, and blue, were used together to outline the floral motif in these consecutive lines, the effect is vivid brilliance and depth. Without doubt, the weavers were challenged to weave this exquisite design. The finest examples are woven either entirely of silk or with silk warp and weft and fine wool pile. They have a great density of pile, counting, for example, about 525 knots per square inch in the emperor carpet, here at the center, and almost double the number in the love carpet above. To enhance the beauty of the pattern, the metal thread, together with silk pile, was woven in brocaded effect, face-plain weave in the group of Polonaise carpet and the love carpet. Now, all those technical characteristics impact, of course, the carpet's present condition and are important in conservation and display methodology. Carpets were made to be hung, walked, and sat upon, as proven by this 16th century folio. The obvious result of such use was pile abrasion and ultimately damage to a carpet foundation. Other reasons for physical and chemical degradation were insect infestation, fiber oxidation, mishandling, and inappropriate environment and storage. Today, the museum practices to roll carpets for storage. In the past, however, were not in use, the carpets were stored folded. Those folds produced the most damaged area, easily recognizable here on the emperor's carpet. Brown wool pile dyed with iron mordant is another component that is consistently subject to damage. Because of their importance and the high cost related to their production, those carpets were treasured and repeatedly conserved. As an example, the emperor carpet has 4 generational patches, over 700 in total, and 2 silk linings. In the museum, the carpet collection is scholarly study, preserve, and ultimately share with the public. Displaying the collection is imperative. The most fragile carpets were and continue to be displayed horizontally on the platform. The majority of carpet, however, are displayed hanging vertically on the wall because of their large dimension and our limited space. To evaluate the present methods of conservation and display, we must look back at the museum standards as they develop historically. We recognize 3 major developments. First, at the turn of the 20th century, there was an important campaign of conservation which coincided with the start of major museum and private collections. Second, a turning point in the progress of conservation and display methodology took place in the early 1970s. This coincided with the formation of the Museum Department of Textile Conservation in 1973, and also with preparation for installation of the Museum Islamic Gallery installation in 1975. Third is the 2011 project of installing the Alticalsa Gallery. For the Department of Textile Conservation, it was an 8-year-long project. More than 400 textile and carpet were examined, treated, and prepared for display, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to review the history of the museum textile and carpets conservation and display practices, and subsequently to develop new directions. First, the turn of the 20th century. In images from that time period, we see the Safavid carpets either hanging from the gallery's picture rail with wires or installed with a slat directly against the wall. The carpet's upper edges look straight and evenly distributed throughout the top, which indicates the presence of webbing attached to the piece and then most likely to a wooden slat. The system was a great improvement over the old method of hanging carpets and tapestry from rings. In that period, it was volunteers who prepared and conserved the museum carpets for display. Some carpets entered our collection with previously made repair. To withstand the stresses of hanging, common treatment at that time were consolidation with adhesive, as for example this compartment carpet in the upper left, upper right side, which was probably treated before 1910 entry into the museum. This treatment is irreversible and poses problem for carpet handling and storage. Because the carpets cannot be stored flat, it is rolled into 20 inches diameter tube. The customary diameter used in the museum is 8 to 10 inches. Although this carpet has been hung before, in the future it will be displayed entirely flat on the platform. Other type of treatments, crude repair, reweaving, and insertion from another carpet could also be recognized as a turn of the 20th century or earlier work. In most cases, those repairs created distortions, which in time damaged the piece. The dyes used for the restoration materials were unstable and faded over time. Wet cleaning was considered a necessary procedure. As the interest in carpet increased at the beginning of the 20th century, many damaged carpets were reshaped using their well-preserved parts and adding insertion of comparable carpets taken from another carpets. The practice often resulted in the great losses of original areas as the carpet was trimmed to incorporate insertions and to look clean and complete. In the 70s, carpet conservation methodology changed. Reconstruction of the carpet's original shape was done whenever possible using a monochrome background fabric to which the original components were attached and which also compensated for the missing area. Fragments that were not part of the original were removed. This type of treatment would not have been acceptable at the beginning of the 20th century. Here is exemplified by a Mughal carpet on the left side, where actually the remains of a small section of border increased the mount by approximately 9 square feet. An important direction in carpet conservation was the development of the stitch consolidation method to a full support fabric, illustrated in the center image. This method improved over the years and continues to be used today. Consolidation treatment to a full support is appropriate for fragile pieces that can no longer be stable on their own. The weight is transferred entirely to a strong new fabric. In the 70s and 80s, cotton duck was used as a support to which the carpet was consolidated by latent couched stitching method. Although the conservation treatment and the stitch-mounted method helped preserve those pieces, the materials used for the mount construction 40 years ago show evidence of fatigue and will need to be replaced. Reconstructing missing area of a carpet by reweaving, exemplified here on the right side, was practiced at that time by those on the field. Although the Textile Conservation Department was reweaving tapestry, at the time carpets were not rewoven in the department except in rare occasions and for very small areas. These techniques is rarely used because the tightness of the carpet's weaving makes the insertion of new warp and weft difficult and possibly damaging the original. This is an example here on the right of a trial reweaving done in 1980s by a private conservator at the request and specification of the department. The reweaving method was used for a small area only. Plexiglass protection began to be used, especially for fragmentary pieces and for small silk carpets. So all those new directions developed in the 70s and 80s were important components of our professional evolution. They were developed under the leadership of Nobuko Kashitani, the Department of Textile Conservation conservator in charge during that time period. In the 1975 installation, the carpets continued to hang with webbing. At that time, Velcro was not considered sufficiently strong to support such heavy weight. Some carpets already had the old jute webbing, others received new nylon webbing. For hanging, the webbing was nailed to a poplar wood slats coated with shellac and later with polyurethane, a water-based polymer product. In the 1975 installation, displaying the oversized carpet was challenging because no platform were designed for the Safavid carpets. The solution was either to roll the excess on an aluminum tube at the top of the carpet and suspend it with brackets, or to display the carpet sideways in weft direction. None of those three methods were used in 2011 installation. Carpet's rotation were rarely possible in the old galleries. An attempt to solve this issue on a group of Persian carpet, illustrated on the upper image on the left side, was made by designing consecutive panels, each holding a carpet which, when not on display, was stored behind the wall. Although this method was a step forward to necessary rotation between display, the carpets were stored in the hanging position inappropriate for their preservation. This method of display was not considered for the 2011 installation either. Now, the 2002-2011 8-year-long project of reinstalling, or preparing rather saying, for reinstalling the new Islamic galleries was yet another significant moment in the evolution of our professional practices. This time, the progress was impacted by our having state-of-the-art lab facilities and analytical equipment, greater variety of conservation materials, and a large team of highly qualified conservators. The collection of Safavid carpets was reviewed by Textile Conservator with curatorial staff, and selection for the first installation were made. 2 consecutive rotations were also based on the artistic and historic quality of the pieces, their condition, the necessary treatment, and preparation for display. Display type was chosen and included horizontal display on a recently designed platform, vertically display hang on the wall or in a mount, and for oversized carpet, hanging on the wall with excess of newly designed platform for partial support with a drop storage bags space. All 3 are exemplified in this Safavid gallery. A modular platform was constructed here in the front, for the flat display of the world-renowned emperor carpet, which, because of its fragile condition, has been displayed in the museum only twice before for a short period of time. After major conservation, which I will describe later, this carpet will remain on display for 6 months at a time. The platform will then be reshaped to accommodate other rotations. This platform here was designed to accommodate the partial display as well as the storage of the excess or oversized carpet if necessary. The front of the platform is detachable to accommodate access to a storage space where the excess carpet could be rolled on an 8-inch diameter tube to be suspended and protected from dust. Plexiglass protection is a major component for the preservation of art made of organic material, although it is rarely possible for large carpet. Small and fragmentary carpets are all displayed under plexiglass protection. The large carpets made of silk and or with metallic thread, whose size does not allow their display under plexiglass, are displayed for a shorter period of time, 4 to 6 months. We also design, exemplify here, a system we call the gallery installation mounts as permanent gallery components. It consists of the back support on which pieces can be rotated periodically, installed with Velcro, and then covered with a plexiglass box. After display, the pieces will be stored out of this mount, either flat or rolled. The system has been used before by the Department of Textile Conservation for temporary installation. Regular rotations are scheduled accordingly to the carpet's condition, materials, and form of display, and period vary between 4 months and 24 months. So as Professor Walter Denny said, please come back and you will see always new galleries, new objects. For hanging carpets, jute and nylon webbing was replaced with Velcro, a polyester material so strong that a 2-inch square piece can support 175 pounds. To make its edge stronger and to reduce the stitching impact on a carpet, Velcro was first machine stitched to a cotton or polyester webbing and then hand stitched to the carpet. Generally, a 2 inches wide Velcro attached to a 3 inches wide webbing was used. When a carpet was heavy and oversized, we used 2 rows of Velcro plus webbing. Excuse me. For small carpet, 1 inch wide Velcro attached to 2 inches wide webbing was sufficient. A safety Velcro approximately 1 inch by 6 inch was attached to both ends of large carpets and to the back of the slats for the safety. This Velcro method was not new to us. We have used it before to hang museum tapestry. Velcro webbing was stitched directly to the small, well-preserved carpets, the image in the center. Most of the carpets, however, received an approximately 12 inches wide header to reinforce the top area. Excuse me, I think I need a little bit of water. I'm trying to deliver the talk in a time, so excuse me for reading a little bit faster. The Velcro webbing was stitched directly to the small, well-preserved carpet. Most of the carpets, however, received that approximately 12 inches wide header to reinforce the top area before Velcro was attached. And for the first time, we introduced the extended header in the upper center image, an approximately 50 inches wide header to support the upper part of oversized carpets, which were in generally fair condition but had some concern at their top areas. The headers were made of cotton duck, and some carpets, the sides were also reinforced with the same fabric. During the Alticalsa project, conservation treatment evolved as well. Minimum intervention was our main approach. Stitched consolidation method continued to be used when necessary. Among other, treated with this method is one of the finest carpet in the museum collection, the love carpet. Its condition is still remarkably good. Wet yet fragile areas are distributed along its central vertical and horizontal line, probably from the previous folds, as well as at its top and bottom edges. Those areas were consolidated into 3 vertical partial supports made of cotton fabric, distributed at side and center areas. Top and bottom were also supported with the same fabric. After treatment, the carpet was prepared for display with Velcro, is now hanging in a mount covered with a plexiglass box in the gallery, and it will be rotated in a few months, so I recommend it to see it. The most challenging project was the conservation of the emperor carpet. The treatment of this exceptional piece has been planned repeatedly during the last 25 years, but until the Alticalsa project, it was never possible. The reasons being, first, the carpet's enormous size, secondly, its substantial damage, although not disturbing much of its overall exceptional aspect, and last, the high cost required for such a capital project. Funding finally became available for the 2011 installation with the generosity of Rebecca and Richard Lindsay. The goal was to free the carpet of all the linings, 2 of them, 4 generations of patches, 700 plus, and inappropriate restoration performed in its past. Those had created distortions and would not support the carpet for handling and display. Finally, we have to stabilize its condition through consolidation and preparation for flat display. Wet cleaning was considered but not performed, mainly because of the fragility of the brown dyed wool pile. Macro-level vacuum cleaning was done instead. Documentation and analytical work continued during the whole conservation process. It was the first time in the department that consolidation treatment was done to a soft wool fabric without the usual firm support of cotton duck underneath. And we decided on this type of treatment because the carpet will never hang, and it was strong enough to support its own weight, and this kind of treatment will help with a flat display and especially with its storage. Here are 2 examples of before and after treatment. Another example, before and after treatment, this section of carpet center area missing and compensated with matching colors, specifically dyed wool fabric. Archival papers and polyester felt material covered the platform in preparation for the emperor's carpet installation. It was a combined effort of a large team of museum staff. And just to leave you with an example of another installation for the November 2011 opening of a 17th century Safavid carpet which hangs vertically on the wall. Achievements of the 2011 project regarding the museum's Safavid carpets conservation and display included those innovations. Velcro was introduced and generalized for hanging carpets. Extended header introduced, development of stitch consolidation treatment to a full support of wool fabric without extra cotton duck support, development of consolidation treatment to a partial support, horizontal display of oversized carpets on modular platform, allowing platform reshaping for various rotations, permanent gallery installations, mount with plexiglass protections, and a partial support platform with drop space for storage, extra carpets. In conclusion, as we develop new methodology for the conservation, treatment, and display of the museum's Safavid carpets, we looked back at the evolution of conservation practices during the last century. As a result, we built on the standards strongly established by the Department of Textile Conservation in the 1970s and 80s. Throughout the Alticalsa project, we gained considerable experience and greatly improved methodology. Our goal was to assure the present and future stability and preservation of those art objects, to observe minimum intervention whenever possible, to use non-intrusive and reversible methodology of conservation and mounting, and finally, to maintain consistency in treatment and display throughout the collection within the museum in total. Many thanks for your attention. We still okay with time?
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our speakers from this afternoon's panel. We now conclude today's proceedings, and we will regroup here tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for the second part of the symposium. Thank you again very much, and hopefully see you all tomorrow.